you guys doing?
Awesome.
G'day. How you doing?
We are doing good.
It's good to finally see you, Simon and Martin. We've been talking on WhatsApp, and we've been in the same trainer pool for quite a while. In fact, and this, I see your book now behind you, Simon, because finally the windows got kind of adjusted now, the gym joint. Your book has been a massive support on my whole PSD journey. So in hindsight, thank you for that. It's a masterpiece.
Thank you, Stephanie and I. That's actually the third edition of the book, by the way. We wrote 3 different books. That's the third iteration, the one that got to the publisher. That's another story for another time, perhaps. Probably over beer.
Would you do it ever again? Would you write another book?
Yeah. My problem is focus, which is hilarious coming from a PST, right? Because I had a realization. I'm just rolling off working with a client that I've been with for a while. And I realized that when I'm coaching a client, they're my focus. I want to help them move. And that takes up a lot of my spare mental capacity. And another weird thing is that I miss the commute, because I used to write a lot more blogs, and I wrote chunks of my book while commuting, because where I live, it's an hour and a half to get to London. And so while I was on the train for an hour there and an hour back, I'd write. Whereas now my commute is 0.1 of a second. And Call of Duty's installed on the same machine that I work with, and it's a lot less friction.
Speaking of distractions.
Anyway, moving on.
It does call for a good Call of Duty match. So let's set it up after.
Yep.
We're here to talk about the Agile product model. What is it? Yeah. Where does it come from? Where does it go? Do we go? Cotton Eye Joe. But is it useful? Is it one of the next buzzwords? I mean, let's start with a question like that. Something that I've been pondering over for, well, at least in the last couple of months, and something that I'm wondering for your thoughts, but also from the audience, is I feel that Scrum is not dying, but people are getting sick of the word Scrum and Agile. So my thoughts on this, and that's why I think there's a massive surge in terms like product and product operating model and these kind of things. At the core, they're all models to deliver something that's useful, that solves a problem, and so on. Now, people have been bombarded. They have been hit over the head like a sledgehammer with the term Scrum, Scrum Master, Product Owner, Value, blah, 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 forever, endlessly and relentlessly. And I think the market at large is getting sick and tired of these words, but at the core, at the heart, work will still be the same. What are your thoughts?
I just want to add that I have heard the term Scrum or Agile fatigue for the past 11 years at least. One of the first organizations I worked with when I came back from the US was a big oil and gas industry company. And they talked, that was the first thing they talked about was change fatigue. Some people, don't talk to this person about Scrum, don't talk to this person about Agile, don't talk to this person about DevOps, don't talk to this person about build, because people were just so had enough with the 5th large-scale organizational attempt at transformation, right? I don't think it's Scrum is dying. I think it's a whole bigger conversation on people have change fatigue because the transformations, and I'm using air quotes here, right? Transformations that organizations are trying to achieve, their digital transformations, their whatever they're calling it, they don't result in a net gain for the organization. So it becomes a loss for the organization. And then they're like, what's the next CEO comes along 5 years later, and he's like, we need to do this thing, go in this direction. And it doesn't work again. And then the next CEO comes along 5 years' time, and suddenly they're at it again.
Do you think we are part of that problem as well? Because some of those things that you mentioned resonate with me in the sense that many of those CEOs that I've spoken to and the quote unquote leaders, they go to the birthplace of all Agile, again, quote unquote, transformations. And that's LinkedIn. They see a new buzzword. They're like, fuck, that's cool. Let's apply that. and then the whole shit show starts.
Do you guys all know the movie The Princess Bride?
Yes.
Right, it's one of my favorite. Well, it's one of my top 5 movies of all time, and
that's because it is one of the top 5 movies of all time.
Podcast, right? But anyway, there's a wonderful scene where Inigo Montoya turns around and says, "You keep using this word. I don't think so. You know, inconceivable. I don't think that word means what you think it does." And we're victims of our own success. You know, when I started using extreme programming and Scrum way back late 90s, it wasn't such a big thing, and we're victims of our own success. Now, originally it was a revolutionary approach. It was disruptive. And then because there were really good results coming from teams using it well, that would pay attention to the technical discipline, that would focus on done, that were ruthless on delivery, that would embed feedback loops, and aligned with the principles and using the Agile Manifesto in values and intent, success was achieved. Now, because people wanted to replicate that, you had this rapid expansion. And I've been in organizations where they, you know, all the project managers and secondhand car salesmen changed their CV to Agile coach, and then came in, hadn't even read the Scrum guide or the Kanban guide, and didn't understand the values, didn't understand the approach, didn't have the chutzpah or capability to have an argument with leadership about, no, we need to get rid of this impediment, or no, we need to slow down to go fast. And so it then starts popping. Now, as soon as it becomes a factory, you lose things. Like, and do you remember coding when the middle rate developer reads design patterns, right? And then they want to make a factory out of everything. And there's sometimes a singleton's all you need, but they want to craft, I need to write a factory. It's like, dude, the only people who write frameworks do factories. Everyone else uses other design patterns. And I think that's where Agile's at. So the term has become abused. Now, we still need this stuff. We still need that core principle of do something, get some feedback, do something else in empirical, like truly empirical way where there's transparency, inspection, adaptation. Scrum, Agile, Kanban, all burnt. So what do we use? Let's go for product. And that's why it's now the product operating model, not the Agile operating model. And, you know, in about 3 or 4 years' time, it's going to be the potato operating model. But same stuff, different label.
Let's mark that in the calendar, Jim, for to have a review on this particular conversation.
Can I be a certified potato consultant, like a CPC or something?
I think that'd be hilarious, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's going to sound dumb. I'm just going to say yes and to everything that you all are all saying. And a couple things jump out in my memory is I remember it was probably like 6-7 years ago, I was in a big bank, and one of the old stodgy developers who's been around since punch card days came up to me after a session on agility and said, you know, this is the same shit we did in the 80s. It just went by a different name. It was TQM, then it was lean, then it was this, and they rattled off a bunch of things I had heard of and things I hadn't because they were custom for that organization. And I said, well, how'd that go? And they're like, I liked it. I actually enjoyed work a lot more in the 90s than I do today. So a lot of these things are not new. And, you know, someone was asking me about the product, this whole product model, product organization, all that stuff. And I've grown very weary in the last few months of it because I'm like, let me get this straight. You want to take some really smart people and you want to give them a few things to work on. You want to give them leadership who understands what they do, the challenges they're going to have. And you want to tell them they don't have to worry about everything. They just need to worry about a few things and do it at high quality. I'm like, yeah, that's going to work. I can already tell you that's going to work. It's not inherently different than anything we've been talking about or many people have been doing for years. But it's, I think if you pull up any of the big lists of biases out there, the infographics on biases, and ask somebody who's been through a number of Agile transformations, be like, which biases do you recognize? The recency bias is what the product model is. People are like, well, it's new. No, it's not new.
Yeah.
But they're giving it more value because it feels new. And they go to the airport bookstore and there's books that look new. Right?
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you. I think it is new. I think it is new to the people that are hearing it.
Mm.
Now, here's the thing: is that there's this thing, the Agile echo chamber. You know, it's one of the reasons that Agile 2024 was in a real big trouble. Like, people weren't going to the conference because it's the same people talking to each other about the same stuff. Like, how many times are you going to go to a conference and hear somebody do a presentation on sizing? You know, it's neat. Everyone does it different. Good, carry on. The beauty of the product model is it's crossing the divide that Agile's been trying forever. Because Agile came from IT, there's the contamination or the taint that it came from the technical side. Whereas the perception that products coming from the business side means that it's immediately a little bit more accessible. And I think when I'm working with clients, you know, I'm beyond bored with frameworks of vocabulary. But let's focus on the principles. Let's get back to like distilling things down to core principles, getting stuff done quickly, getting a feedback loop going, and be cool about that. Now, whether you want to call it product, agile, scrum, potato, fine. Yeah. But there's been a long-running argument in my house that if you get some dough and you roll it into a round shape, put some sauce and cheese and toppings on it and bake it, it's a pizza, right? Now, if you fold it over before you bake it, is it a pizza?
It's a calzone.
So don't call it a pizza.
Or it's a taco.
Over here, call it pizza calzone.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that I think we've seen a lot of calzones called pizzas and pizza, and it just becomes, when I hear people go, oh, we're agile, or we're doing Scrum, and you go, no, you're agile, but you're not doing Scrum. Like, and that level of nerdiness about the language is not common.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and people
I'm also going to be like, really? Are you really? Let's have a conversation about what you're actually doing. Right.
Well,
do you think we should be nerdy about the language, Martin?
I think there's two sides. I think there's two sides to that. I think the average person doesn't give a crap about the language. They don't care whether it's called a stand-up or it's called a daily Scrum. They just don't care. Or it's called a demo or it's called a review, right? They don't care about that stuff. But the language that we use has meaning, right? In different contexts. Now, it may be that language has meaning in lots of different contexts. The existential crisis in the Scrum Master community at the moment is because Scrum Master means something different to different people. For some people, it just means team lead. For other people, it means Jira admin. For others, again, it means somebody who's probably maybe going to drop us in it there, a life coach who's helping people better themselves, but has no other skills to be able to help the team. And that fragmentation of what is it really is something that isn't defined because we have too many sources of truth, right?
No,
I know.
No.
So Simon, I know we've got Scrum Guide, right, which is the single source of truth. But then we've got Ken's story, we've got Jeff's story on top of that, we've got Scrum Alliance's story on top of that. Let's not talk about some of those other folks that are building on top of it. The overall story of what is this thing is not consistent, and that's something I think we and this is important to Sanders' question, we as a community we effectively, this is me just throwing this out there. I think we need something that is kind of like what PMI was in the 50s. In the 1950s, people had been doing project management, right, for 50 plus years. The Gantt chart was 1906. So this stuff had been around for a really long time. And the industry got too fragmented. There were too many Muppets and Muggles trying to pass themselves off as having capability and skill in that particular space. And a group of folks got together, created the PMI Institute. Now, we all know where it went, but have something that says, here's the accreditation that you need in order to say you're doing this thing, and it then becomes a solid accredited body. Like in the UK, we have the British Computer Society, we have the IEEE, you have the Accountants Association. What's the Agile equivalent that we need in order to bring common understanding, Xander, to the words that we're using, so that everybody knows if you say you're an accredited Scrum Master, that means you can do all this stuff, right?
And I love what you're saying. On a PSM course I was running this week, somebody came up with the term Scrum Maestro, which I think is really quite wonderful. It's like, that is beautiful, because there's no connotation or taint to it. And I think that's one of the downfalls of Agile, is that it was so easy to get that Scrum Master ticket.
Yep.
And it's even worse that when it was built, the first versions that Ken was producing with Scrum Alliance, there was no assessment process to it.
Yep.
And at least with Scrum.org, there's a minimum level of assessment. You've got to get your language right.
Yeah.
And I see a comment on YouTube where Floren's saying that we need standardization in an organization. And I couldn't agree more than that. Like, I don't care what language you use within your organization, but have one standard vocab or lexicon in your org and stick to it.
This is that autonomy versus alignment story, right? We want autonomy for the people that are doing the work within the scope of the work that they're doing and how they make progress towards the goals. But we need some level of alignment across the organization on what are people's jobs. What do you expect from this person in this particular role? What do you expect from different things in the organization, different parts of the organization? What's expected of them? And those expectations are key to that story, right?
Well, you know, it's funny because over the last couple of years, I've swung in a lot of different directions in different meetings, between being very focused on language and just letting it go by. And I would say most of the time when I let it go by, it's because I understand that they understand the intent and we're talking about apples and apples. But there's been a few times in the last few months where I haven't challenged somebody's vocabulary, and just to confirm enough like that we're talking about the same thing. And then I've had to eat my words later and be like, oh shit, hold on. We are not talking about the same thing. You're using this word and I thought we were using the same idea, and we're not even close. And shame on me. And I think that's why people like us can get labeled as overly pedantic at times, because we just don't know.
No, and that was the interesting thing about the conversation we've had in Finland with Amber Vandenberg on this show, where she was very adamantly clear, like, these terms, whatever terms that we're using, we got to make sure that we are sure that we're talking about the same thing, right? Semantics do matter, and that's where you see me as a Scrum Master or whatever position I'm in the beginning, I will hammer out, make sure that people understand the words and what I mean with them until they can reverberate what I'm saying. They know exactly what I mean and that they have the same picture. Because I was like, the demo, that's where we do that. No. Sprint demo is completely different than a sprint review, right? And if that stuff is not, like, the basis is not there, we're not building a solid foundation, we're building our house on quicksand, and that's something that I want to avoid. But that's also something that many people are very allergic to. Like, why do you go over this again? We know what a daily stand-up is for. I told you 1,000,000 goddamn times that it's not a stand-up. So apparently you don't.
And what you're talking about here is an essential trait that I don't see enough demonstration of from various experts in many domains, and that's closed loop communication. I think, let's get really pedantic here, I think a lot of people broadcast but don't communicate. Now, if we broadcast, we send a signal out and we don't validate that the person who we're trying to get the signal received has understood the message as we intended. Yeah. And a good closed loop communication system will say, I am saying this, and then someone repeats back to you what you're saying, and then you go ack or knack, and then you repeat that until it's met. And every safety critical system does it, like pilots do it, military do it, et cetera, et cetera. How often have we seen in business a conversation going on where people speak like there's no connect? You know, when you end up with this word salad and people walk out of it confused. Mm-hmm. And I think at its very core, if we can bring more closed loop communication, it's going to benefit. And whether we call it agile product management, whether we call it product management, whether we call it potato management, I don't mind, as long as we all get aligned to that purpose. It'd be great if we could see potato management trending on social media. That'd be pretty.
Isn't that indicative, though, Simon? Isn't that indicative, though, of having people in the room that have no understanding what the hell we're doing in the first place?
Lack of closed loop communication, Martin. Most agile adoptions are broadcast, not communicated. They're not collaborative.
Yes. Yeah, no, I understand that, but what I mean is the people running it don't actually understand the thing they're trying to run. So they don't understand,
right? That's just it, right? Because if I don't know, when I try and explain to you something I don't, how many times have you been caught out in the classroom? Like, I've been caught out loads where I've tried to explain something that I didn't understand properly, right? And you start somewhere and someone smarter than you goes, hang on a second. And if we use good closed loop communication and we invite feedback and discussion, we'll get a better understanding at the same time as we make sure we're both aligned. And if we do this, it becomes contagious, and then it'll just flow out through all the organization. But it takes a lot of chutzpah to be able to correct it. Sorry, Jim, I talked too much.
No, you don't. But I was thinking about what you said about the value of consistent language, and when I was rewatching the Sully Sullenberger movie about landing the plane in the Hudson, it kind of hit me about the language, because they have a very clear language. And imagine if air traffic control at any busy airport, but a really busy airport, had to deal with 15 pilots all using very different ways of communicating with them. It's not going to feel super safe. And so they have that clarity in language. And when they do break ranks and use non-clear terms, it normally ends up on TikTok or YouTube, because like, holy crap, go listen to this exchange with the ATC or whatever, or this near miss. And I think, we're not flying planes of 100 plus people around and hold their lives in our hands, but we do sometimes see life or death situations. We see millions and millions of euros and dollars all the time. And I think that's the value in language. One question, and I know we have a Scotsman on the podcast, is, I don't know if you all are even familiar with the no true Scotsman fallacy, but it's something I've thought about a lot, because I think people in our industry will say, oh, well, and all you gotta do is open LinkedIn. I guarantee you in 30 seconds, we can all go find a post in our feed about it. Is, well, that's not my Scrum. That you're not doing true Scrum. If you were doing true Scrum, true Kanban, true product management, if you were doing real design thinking, you wouldn't say that, think that, do that. Is that mindset why so many people are saying such and such is dead, or we're having this revitalization of old things with new names in a little bit? Is that part of it? Simon's shaking his head. Yeah. So how do we move on? Sorry, Martin, go ahead.
I was going to say it's definitely part of it, but I feel a huge part of it is that there are so many people trying to do the thing that don't understand the thing, because money, right? There's been a huge, massive demand for Scrum Masters and Agile coaches across the world, right? We've been a victim of our own success. loads of people coming in, and supply is nowhere near capacity for demand. Therefore, the bar gets lowered until you meet demand, right? That's what's happening in organization after organization. We can't hire. We need 100 more Scrum Masters. We can't hire Scrum Masters. Why can't we hire Scrum Masters? We can't have 5 people skilled enough. Well, can you just find them? Right? Can you just find them? Who can we get? Can we hire people from somewhere else to come and do this and just send them on a 2-day course and we're good, right? That idea is just it means that, and I'm probably going to be a little bit generalist here. I don't necessarily mean individual people who might be listening, although it might seem that way. In general, I don't know if you saw the Scrum Match data that they recently posted. That I did a repost of the data with a kind of overlay of the levels that they talked about. They posted some data on the people that they'd assessed who came to them and said, we're a Scrum Master, we would like a Scrum Master flag on our profile with a nice level. What level are we at? And they assess people to give them that level. And 49% of Scrum Masters failed to even have basic knowledge and understanding of Scrum. 49, that's almost 50% of Scrum Masters have absolutely no business calling themselves that or applying for jobs as that, right?
Does not surprise me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's not even the worst of it. You have to go up to 69%, the last 31%, I think, before you hit people that are actually able to apply it.
Yeah, but I think that's interesting what Dave Snowden mentioned as well while he was on this show, is where he would like to see a governing body when it comes to this profession, and he's expecting that there will be an IT body of governance coming over, just as you have in advocacy or with doctors, or there should be a Jim. You're not in favor?
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see something of the caliber of the ICF for professional facilitators, or the coaching certification. That to actually become a base level coach, you've got to have 100 hours, 10 of them proctored after having attended X many hours of training, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's the thing. It's just too easy to get a cert. And there's I had some people applying for an accountability, like a Scrum Master role, and they'd done an online course, 2.5 hours, and they got a ticket. Excellent. Now,
sorry, Jim, go.
Governing body, no. Accrediting body, absolutely.
Okay,
because
I'll give you that one.
I have a friend, and one of his favorite things is, 2 people love each other. What do they say? Oh, well, let's invite the government into this relationship. Like, that is my problem, right? Like, marriage or 2 people living together is fine, but the sad fact is, to do many things, we have to invite the government or invite some sort of governing body in and make it all official. So accreditation, Simon, absolutely. I am all in favor of continually raising the bar to make it easier for companies and people to separate good from bad. And or maybe not even good and bad, but just different skill sets. But
how about we say competent? How about making it easier for organizations to identify people competent in certain capabilities?
Right.
Yeah.
And I would love to bring my co-host into an engagement, but we don't need someone at his capability level, and nor can we afford it. And I think that's fine. That's good for everybody involved, right? It's really the mismatch of when people think they're buying beluga caviar and they're not. They're getting some river fish in the Midwest. That's the problem. And I have one of my good friends is in the trades, and he told me this story last time we were hanging out of the new guy on the job crew went to a store, spent about $200, got new clothes, new tools, new this, came to the job site, purposely dirtied himself up, and you would not be able to tell him apart from somebody who's been working on that site for 20 years, because learning the language wearing the clothes and buying the tools is easy. And I think that's what leads to the true Scotsman stuff online, is telling people they're doing it wrong, or telling people and spending your days and hours telling people they're using the wrong words. That's easy. That's the lowest level stuff. But those of us who actually do this and love doing it and value doing it every day, we tend to have different opinions on things and spend our hours a little different, I think.
So I think this is a really good segue into the topic that we're actually supposed to talk about, the Agile operating model. And so we're at the verge of this blowing up, right? That's my assumption, because it's being pushed everywhere. I think this is going to be the next thing, the next big thing. Now, we have the opportunity as well. Let's assume that we're going to be the apom.org, right? Agile Product Operating Model.org. Dibs on the server name. How are we going to accredit this? Like, what would be your requirements for someone to be truly certified? Like, we have a Scrum Master right now. The word master means we've mastered something, but the level to actually get a Scrum Master certification is abysmally low. How would you do that with APOM?
I would copy Dean Heffingwell's really, really successful SAFe model, because it was rampantly successful. So the first thing we need is a really sexy infographic that maps one-to-one with existing organizational structures. We back everything up with PAPOM whatevers, and we use whatever words we like, so that we got the sexy graphic, we got everything badged up, and that way we can flog a whole lot of 2-day courses to milk this next little wave, and then we can retire.
All right, good shit. Don't forget to put AI in it somewhere.
Yeah.
So, no, that will be an advanced training on each module, so that what you can do is you can then be APMPOAI. And what we'll do is we'll add into the website a subscription model where you'll be able to use our AI model. You can feed it in stuff, and the AI will then give you prompts and guide you through, events like what to say at a sprint review with an awkward stakeholder. And you type their question in the AI, and the AI will give you a prompt back.
Yeah, and if you say like the abbreviation 3 times in your mirror, Dean Leffingwell will show up behind you
and charge a subscription. But the thing is that if we do that, we're going to end up with the Blade Runner Tears in the Rain situation, right?
Yeah.
And Simon's being sarcastic, but
to a degree.
To a degree. I feel like a little bit at least, but for it, just in case somebody is like, oh, I can't wait to get the certification. Is education bad? Like, all of us are educators in a sense. It's one of the things that we do. We train, we educate. So about the product operating model, I have found that a lot of product people, innovation people, design people, they don't value that whatsoever. So do we see a need to educate people on APOM, as Sunder's calling it?
Martin, you've been awfully quiet.
Which is atypical for Martin, for anybody who knows him.
I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because I've had some conversations with some CSTs as well around the same thing we're talking about, right? Some kind of accreditation body that is recognized. And I think if we have that, it needs to be somebody that's recognized by the big 3, right? So recognized by Scrum.org, recognized by Scrum Alliance, and recognized by Scrum Inc., right? And at least those 3. And it needs to not hurt their business, because otherwise they'll not go for it, right? So their certifications would need to be stepping stones on the journey that is described in the APOM or whatever the heck Simon's calling it, right? It's the
they're the standard turf war thing, Martin. You just cut them in. Now the thing is, if you educate those organizations to be able to sell the badge, whatever, but this then gets into that curious ground of certifying for certification's sake, And really, whether we're talking an agile product model or a product development model, we're talking about that core principle of build something of reasonable quality, like it's good enough to get feedback on, and iterate. And I think that's the hard thing, is that we've strayed so far down these various rat holes and now offering certification on, you know, how to tie your shoelaces. It moves away from that core expectation that you need to be competent. And this is where we see people moving into the world of Scrum Mastery, product ownership, etc., that haven't ever worked in a team delivering anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how would you define that? Like, I hope we're not going to go into the same terminology if this actually becomes a thing. But let's say we have an APOM master, Agile Product Operating Model Master. What would you need to be a master? What would you need to have a certification? I don't mean like the level 1 anyone can buy it in the store, but like properly we have lived through this.
Well, this is why I love less, because to become a less accredited trainer, you've got to come up with a case study and you get interviewed with the peers. And this is where Scrum.org's key only competence-based accreditation is a PST, right? Because the actual qualifying process that you have to go through to become a PST includes demonstration of competence, experience, discussion, etc. So let's start getting the Maestro name in there already, Sanders, so that APOM Maestro. So if you're going to be a Maestro, that means that you've worked on a product team, that you have done some training, coaching, facilitation, that you understand process delivery, you can facilitate some sort of reflection session. And you've got some demonstrated competence at getting after and fixing impediments, as well as arguing with stakeholders.
So that process, Simon, kind of already exists because we all went through it to become PSTs, right?
Yeah, but we're not called master or maestro. We have transcended being a master. Now we're a trainer, which is kind of the reverse order, but sure.
You and I went through a very different pathway, Mr. Hinch.
Very true.
What do you mean? Yeah, from our background and where we came from to come into this world.
Actually, the way we qualified as PSTs was different. Is different to how someone would qualify now, because we're very early adopters.
Yes.
Well, and think about how a sheriff became a sheriff in the Old West. Like, hey, there's gunfire outside. Here's a badge. Like, I trust you. Go outside and do stuff. Now think about what it takes to become a police officer or a constable. I mean, it's very different. And we could argue if the good way or the not hard enough. But that's a whole other conversation. All right. You're right. I'll call him a Bobby. What if I call him a Bobby? Is that better?
Yeah. Well, what we're saying is that as systems mature, there becomes more control mechanisms in place.
Right. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that those early adopters shouldn't have gotten that accreditation. It just means we've learned more about, we've increased demand. We've learned more about what to look for, what not to look for. And maybe I also think it's kind of when I was 15, I wanted it be as easy as possible to get a driver's license. And as soon as I had that piece of plastic, I'm like, make it as hard as you want. I don't care anymore. Make it as hard on those current 15-year-olds. I think that kind of filters into the business world too, is we tend to overvalue something more that we have.
Yeah. I really recognize, Jim, that there's been, as with any group of people who are at the top of their game, some PSTs talk about, these new PSTs aren't very good, and there's these crappy PSTs coming in. But the reality is that they were crap too when they started, right? You're not a master of anything when you start doing something, whether that's training, teaching, coaching, whatever the hell it is. You need practice, and you need to fall on your face a lot to learn how to do things. And that is generally in an accreditation program that's generally reflected in the need to maintain that accreditation, right? That even those people that came in because they were founding members, right? Founding members of the system that came in early enough that there weren't all those hoops to jump through, do still need to jump through those hoops at some point in order to maintain their accreditation. It's like I always thought it was nuts that my grandmother was still allowed to drive, right? When she passed her test, you filled out an application form and they handed her her license. So she never had to do any formal training, never had to do anything. In my day, when I learned to drive, to Jim's analogy, right? When I learned to drive, you got 3 questions when you sat down with the instructor about what's in the book, and then you got to drive around for half an hour and he passed or failed you. Today in the UK, our local test center here has a 35% pass rate. 35% of people that take the test pass.
And they're still terrible.
And they're still terrible, right?
I was at an air show just up the road from me. There's a RIAT, the Royal International Air Tattoo, every year. And I had the good fortune to have a conversation with an F-15 Eagle fighter pilot. And he had finally qualified to do free flights. And he was observing that it was the first time in 4 years that he was not observed on every flight. And he smiled wryly and said, and now the learning begins.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're talking with someone with thousands of hours flight, that they're flying the most performance fighter jet in the world. And the amount of training they had to do to get deemed operational in their squadron before they're allowed to be not monitored every flight.
And they will lose that operational status at the drop of a hat if they mess something up.
Oh,
yep. 100%.
He said a flying day is 12 hours. It's like 4 hours, 5 hours prep, maybe a 2-hour sortie, and then the debrief, the observation, logging, etc., etc. And that doesn't include all the gym work and etc. And the reason he chose the squadron he did is he gets to fly 5 times a week. And he said that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, can anyone tell me what the Agile operating model is?
3 principles. I'll just
Product
bang them out.
operating model under.
Come again?
Product
Either
operating
one.
model.
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry.
It's the same thing. It's do something, get some feedback, do something else.
So why is it different?
I don't
And why
think
is it why is an Agile product operating model and not, for instance, like what Marty Kagan is talking about a lot, the product operating model? What's the difference?
Well, just to wind us all the way back where we started, Agile is dead. Long live the new Agile. The new Agile is called product. Agile is a toxic term. Marty Kagan's got a lot of clout. He's written a huge number of books. They're good books. And he's using the term product. I'm just waiting for him to bring out he has got courses.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you? You know, and this is the thing. It's that's the way business works.
True. So what use is it going to be to organizations and to our audience? What's going to change?
They're going to pay someone else for a new certificate.
Let that be us.
The same job.
Well, I see, yes, there are going to be people who find new ways to make money off this new operating model. But when I think about why my clients are using the word product more than they ever have before, it's typically because they're looking at organizational design things. Like, what does it mean to do that? And it's still early, but I'm a little nervous that many of them are going to say, oh, we're now in a product model, a product org design, and nothing's different. Nobody reports to anybody else. Nobody sits anywhere else. Nobody works in anything else. They don't use any more tools, but they're just going to call it something more because it's got product in the title now. And that's the big problem, I think, with any change fatigue is great. It's another vocabulary, another set of consultants, another thing. And it's just going to be, my life is not going to change. So I'm not going to care very much because nothing is actually going to change.
You just reminded me of a situation I was in 10 plus years ago. And I was in helping an organization with the adoption of Scrum and agility. And I was just catching up with the guy over coffee in the morning. And I said, how's it all going? What do you think? And he goes, I'm just going to keep my head down. The way this organization goes through management and reorgs, if I just keep my nose clean, pay the right lip service in 9 months' time when we swing back to doing something new, I'll be right. And do you know what? If we do actually stick to it, then I'll think about changing in 9 months' time. But I'm not going to change every time the weather vane moves. Yep. I'll only change when the ground does. And I think that's the thing. Unless we have that true adoption of an organizational focus on value using empiricism.
Well, but how many organizations actually do that? How many organizations not only do that but sustain it long term? I mean, the only product group I can think of that really focused on that and sustained it is the Azure DevOps team under Brian Harry, right? And they did activities like they did activities that took 4 years to complete. While they're delivering product, we need to change the way we do this, right? And it's organizational structure, it's team structure, it's product structure, right? Because there has to be alignment, otherwise you're going to have friction, and that takes time if you've got a big product. If you've got a big company, big product, these things take time. So we're not. What's the average lifespan of a CEO?
And that's the thing.
Not enough time to do anything.
The stability Brian gave the Azure DevOps team and the support he had from Sam Guggenheimer, was absolutely instrumental. Now, I think that there's a really good question that's come in through the chat is like, what if I'm a product manager, what do I do differently between the Agile model and the product model? I would assert your practices may vary a little bit, but the same techniques you're going to use discovery techniques, you're going to use validation techniques, creating hypothesis, validating that hypothesis, getting something built as early as possible up the truth curve is super important, whichever way we go. So I think if we look at it in 2 years' time, an organization that successfully adopts an agile way of working and successfully adopts a product way of working will become indistinguishable. And it's only us process pedants that would probably get upset about the language.
And that point, Simon, is one that I've talked to our friend Yuval about, is some of the things that the industry, not just the four of us, the industry at large talks about, we're the only ones really who care. Like the thing, I won't mention the specific practice or group that Yuval asked me about, but he said, what do you think about this? I go, I know what that is. I read about it. I see it, but I would go on record in saying that 9 out of my 10 clients have never heard of it. 9 out of 10 people that I interface with in a given week, if not all 10, would not know what you're talking about. And he's like, that's kind of his opinion too. And so I think Agile product operating model or product operating model, those are synonyms to all but industry thinkers and talkers.
You've just helped me with a metaphor, right? In the automotive industry, they refer to it as the powertrain. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's electric powered, hydrocarbon powered, what flavor of hydrocarbon, it's all powertrain. And I think what we're talking about is the powertrain for organizations. And you should be able to swap those out to suit your needs. Like if you only need to go 1/4 of a mile super quick, you're probably looking at a V12 supercharged, fully blown, sucking ethanol, right? If you're doing just commute journeys and around town, you've probably got an electric thing. If you're doing long haul carrying big loads, probably a big diesel, because that's the right tool for the job.
It depends on what job, because that's assuming that a car needs to go from A to B, not assuming that it's a status symbol as well.
Well, then buy the right badge, right, Sander?
Yeah, exactly. Go
Because,
to the
you know,
other.
a Cupra is an Audi is a VW, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Pretty
why
much.
I like your maestro word, Simon, because I've used that same mentality before about servant leadership. Is if we go to the opera or actually I guess it'd be an orchestra event, if it sucks, are we going to be able in the audience as a customer to identify that it's the third chair French horn that's off key? No, we're going to look at the guy or gal in the front as the maestro, but they're not playing an instrument, but they're in charge of orchestrating a lot of people doing things that they themselves can't do for themselves. But to a customer, that might even be all we see. If you look at some videos, you can barely see the people in the back row of the timpani section, but you can surely see the white gloved maestro type person. So I like that. I'm going to think more, but plus it only requires one or two letter changes. So it's even easier to update all of our stuff.
Yeah.
So Jim, there's something quite important to that analogy though, the maestro analogy. Who decides who's in the orchestra and not? Who decides who plays what when?
Ooh, well, I don't know how to play an instrument, but if Hollywood can be believed, the maestro does make, or someone like that maybe makes the end decision, but the drummers select the drummers. The French horn people select the French horn stuff.
I agree, but ultimately, if you've got a conductor for your maestro, for your orchestra, and they're consistently getting something up with a particular section, they're going to address that. They have the authority they need to address that. And that's something that I feel is key to the whole conversation about how not just like we're talking semantics about what the hell the thing's called, right? But if we're looking at evidence, the evidence, at least that I've seen, shows that nothing works. Scrum's not working. Safe's not working. Scrum at Scale's not working. They're not actually providing long-term systemic benefits and change to organizations. That's Christian, one of our fellows that the data's in.
Columnity is
that is in, and that's what it shows. It's all crap, right? But the reason it's all crap is because the people that understand the changes that need to be made in order to get the outcome that we're trying to achieve do not have the authority within the organizational context, right? There are organizations where you don't need authority in order to get things done. Netflix, right? If you've got a holacracy, you don't need authority to get things done. You just need a good idea. But for most organizations are hierarchical. And in a hierarchical organization, the way you are able to do things is through the authority to do it. So you can't actually move away from that hierarchy unless you have the authority to do that, right?
Yeah, who's empowered to conduct the revolution, right?
Yeah.
Well, and to bring this maestro thing to the product operating model is that could be something that's really different. To the question we got in the chat and to some of Simon's points is, if we move towards a product operating model, are you going to give the product manager, product maestro, product, whatever we want to call that person, significant authority, autonomy, the ability to build the team that they need to deliver the product that they want to build? And obviously using feedback loops and empirical data and all these other topics. But if not, I can predict how your new product operating model is going to go if that person's just going to receive requirements from some other group and they're not going to have any authority or intrinsic accountability towards the success.
But Ken actually answered this question way back when he came up with the first iteration of evidence-based management. And what he promoted then was that you create a separate parallel organization that is using a truly empowered operating model. So to break free, you would then create a new organization that is organic in its structure, where you have cells of empowerment. And this is fascinating. If you have heard of Haier, H-A-I-E-R, the Chinese white goods manufacturer, their operating model is fantastic, and they have a series of autonomous cells. And the CEO is really keen on creating a network, not only within the organization, but within their partners as well, which is great from a lean agile procurement perspective, where he's saying he doesn't want to build a walled garden. He wants to build a rainforest. And when we can do that, and we can have teams collaborating together to deliver amazing value, then we can conduct ourselves sort of as we do to solve problems. And we've seen it in Steam back in the golden days, where we see it in Netflix, because you have a look at Netflix and Amazon, they're releasing movie blockbusters now. Yep. More than some of the Hollywood stuff. And they're getting the really good actors, the really good directors, and they're knocking it out of the park using self-organizing principles. And I think ultimately that's where we would like the convergence of the product and the agile operating models to go, to actually bring about organizational agility.
Yeah. This idea of spinning off parallel orgs is not new. And Thunder and I have talked to a number of kind of authors and thinkers around this space, and it's very common. And I just finished the book, Seeing Around Corners, and they talk about how this can go well and how it can go really terribly when that small group of innovative thinkers want to do all these new things, and then their idea has to get folded back in or funded or built by the machine that is built to exploit the existing business model.
And this is the core to Ken's approach, is when the innovators go out and they've got an idea and want to scale it, they have to use their own organic growth principles to scale around the new machine, so it doesn't get folded back into the old machine.
No, and this is one of the conversations that I have over and over with my with one of my best friends, Bruno. He keeps asking me just to nudge and poke and see if he can find some holes in the logic. Like, is the framework ever at fault? Like, could it be that the framework has not been designed correctly? And I think it's not necessarily a framework, because the framework itself, I'm not going to say it's immutable, as the Scrum guide says. I think it's very useful as it has been designed, but it's the way that we treat it. Like, we don't know fully, we cannot fully grasp how this tool can work and how it works. And by the time that we do know, we've gotten so fatigued in trying to wrap our heads around the use of this tool that we need to find something that's simpler. And now we're going to move to the next one that's even just as hard to grasp, and we're going to go into the exact same thing. So my thoughts is Scrum is going to stay alive, at least at heart. We're just going to put a different label on it. Martin, I can see you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that I haven't really seen this problem of actually changing organizations been addressed very well anywhere. You know, in Ken's book, Ken and Jeff's book, they talk about Scrum Studio, which was an attempt at that, you know, an organization within an organization, and then it grows and the rest of the organization shrinks. But KLM is probably a good case study for that one. And it worked well, but not holistically, right? It's not a holistic organizational thing. And the only thing that I've seen that seems to be working as a more holistic approach is the stuff being done around open space agile. And the idea that you don't need to spend years changing the organization like the Azure DevOps team did, but you effectively, it's more complicated than the way I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it in a simple way for this, is you basically get everybody in the organization together. You have a sponsor who has the authority to change whatever the heck we want in the organization, or give that approval to the people that are participating. You get everybody in the organization in the same space, and you say, we want to move in this direction. This is what we want to achieve in the future. What do we need to change as a business? What should our processes and practices look like? And let the participants of the organization build the organization you would like, so that they're not pushing against change. They're the ones driving the change in the first place. It's their ideas that you're implementing.
But Martin, I'm a manager. How should I stay in control?
Yeah, but that's the intrinsic problem,
Very
right?
Very easy. You as a manager have to guide that experiment by defining the purpose as well as clearly stating the constraints, because self-organization can't occur in a vacuum. And I've seen this happen time and time again where people go, oh, we're agile, man. And it's all caftans and bean bags and we can do whatever we want. Man, we're agile. You know, it's like, well, why the hell have we got 10 different logging frameworks? Why are there 13 different ways of connecting to a database? Oh, we're agile. No, you're undisciplined. Sort your shit out and actually deliver value in a business enterprise focused way. And that's because the managers aren't managing. It's really easy to nano manage. It is much harder to empower and define constraints. And I've seen it time and time again, hold people accountable. And if people break a constraint, you correct them, you guide them, you mentor them. And if they screw it up continuously, you fire them, because we're not running a fucking creche for adults. Sorry, I don't normally swear.
No, and
it drives
Simon,
me to distraction. Lack of process discipline.
Simon, I'm curious how and this is probably a segue. So if you want to stay on this current part of product operating model, go ahead. But I'm wondering how funding and budgeting changes in the product operating model, because that's what I'm spending a lot of my time right now thinking and helping clients with.
So it needs to be cyclic.
Say more words.
Right. So if we're truly operating in a feedback loop experimental way, basically you're saying you should fund my product because I will give you X return on investment. So that means there should be a business case behind that. And what you're saying is, if you invest X, I will return you Y. And this is where I will have sufficient empirical, and this is a really important point, objective empirical measures around my experiment, so that as I run my thing, I will see that ROI or not. And you might need to in your business case, such as Google and Facebook have done, where they say, you know, we're going to have to invest in this for a number of years to see the ROI, and it come good. It might be a shorter term experiment. Now, if we do that and we have that feedback loop working, that's where your managers earn their money, because they're then sitting at the poker table going, well, we've given you your chips and you've got no more chips coming back in. Guess what? Your product is now dead. And go and have a look at it. There's a website built to stuff Google killed. Like, Google is really, really good at shutting down stuff that doesn't ROI. Great. That's disciplined business. And so if we run our businesses in that way, if we run our experiments, we're both agile and product focused. And so what will happen is we'll have a rolling horizon. Now, depending upon our kind of product, like if I'm building an oil rig, or if I'm building a ship or a nuclear submarine, we're talking a 5-year program of work here. Now, what I will be able to do is put in feedback loops and checkpoints and balances to make sure that I'm managing my risk, that I'm complying with security, that I'm meeting regulatory controls, that I'm training up the people to operate it. And I can do all of that in a structured way. But that means I'm going to need portfolio discipline as well. And a lot of the time, portfolios are just simply looking at traffic light reports, not radiating effective communication up and down. So that closed circuit communication doesn't happen, so that the really important decisions get to the CEO quickly enough for them to be able to say, stop that, start that.
Discipline should be part of your hiring process, like proven discipline. whether that's in the military or somewhere else, but we hire so many people that are, well, we can be in effective chaos, but we can be very hyper-focused on specific things as well and making sure that this stuff sticks. And if we can find a way to put that into the hiring process and take, I'm almost going to throw up HR into that process as well, then it's going to make it a lot easier to become actually effective throughout the entire organization.
But if we make that humanity and competence part of our constraint, energy company I worked with, there were two core things that you had to demonstrate: competence and respectful behavior. Now, if you behaved in a disrespectful way to anyone, you were out the door faster than you could say boo to a goose. And also, because they remunerated well, it was expected that you were competent. And they would look after people. If you were having a tough time, they would really look after you. And their leadership training regime was really, really good. But that humanity and competence really helped that organization change and grow.
Yeah. Just to give any listener something pragmatic about this, because I am 100% in agreement that we need to teach product owners or product managers, maestros, whatever we want to call in this new model, to form a hypothesis, go off and test it, come back, provide the data, ask for a little bit more money, a little more time to go do the next thing. So there's a technique out there called the kickbox, which started at Adobe, and it had a lot of power in helping that company find new ideas, because to get a kickbox, you got $1,000, I think it was, and you could spend that money to develop a new idea. And you didn't just have to spend that money. You had the time and all that, but you could spend that money however you wanted, like $1,000 worth of free lunches or Starbucks if you wanted. But you had inflection points and review points of saying, are we going to continue? And it was a lot of fanfare about successful or unsuccessful. And it was a very great case where the journey was worth more than if your idea got implemented or not, because it built the habit of teaching people to create a business case, create a hypothesis, go test it, and come back to the company with a new and innovative idea. And if you believe the book that I heard this in, which I do, it's been adopted by, I'm looking at their website right now, companies like 3M, Cisco, Caterpillar, MasterCard, Swisscom, Procter & Gamble, et cetera. So it works so well for them that it spun off, and the idea generating technique created a product in itself. But it's like Google has their very famous graveyard of failed ideas. So do all the big companies. So does Pixar. So does Microsoft. And I think that's what I would love to see come out of the product operating model, is a new generation, a new group of people that don't see the way to get a paycheck as just going to work and not being an asshole and having moderate acumen, but to really say, I want to do a good job, and this new model maybe has given me a structure, a vocabulary, a supportive leader to do that.
So what I'm hearing you say is you really want to see the new model, whatever it's called, really embrace the learning and culture in organizations, so that the failure bow, when a hypothesis is proven not to be working at the moment, is applauded just as strongly as the success bow when you get to iterate to the next level. So that we've got this culture that supports feedback loops, hypothesis-based learning, and using that empiricism to grow and just give people a really good buzz when they get to work and get some excitement to get out of bed, right?
Absolutely. And to frame this as a paradoxical question, though, for you, Simon, is how do we do that, what you just said, without A, turning it into a check the box activity where people just go through the motions, or B, normalizing mediocrity and saying, well, it's okay to get a 10th place ribbon and you shouldn't strive to be successful? How would you do that?
Well, first of all, I'm going to challenge something. There needs to be levels of performance. There are some stuff that we need, particularly at scale, where we just need people to get in and do the grind work, right? For every fighter pilot, there's 10 transport pilots. Now, for whatever reason, they could not, there's 20 Formula One drivers in the world, 20. Now, all the people who drive in the world there's only 20 who can respond. Their reflexes are in the 0.2 of a second range, and they can withstand 6G without G suits. Right? Fighter pilots need G suits to withstand what Formula One drivers withstand. Within our organization, yeah, we're going to need some Formula One drivers, but I love the way Lewis Hamilton phrases it. He says, I have to do what's respectful to the 2,000 people who helped me get onto the track.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, that humility, that connection with the team, that empowerment and that network, it all comes from values and principles. And unless we start getting people to really engage with the force, focus, openness, respect, courage, and commitment in all their interactions with other people, we can whistle Dixie. Because until we have people behaving in that way, empathically, then we're not going to be able to build a learning culture.
Speaking of skill, Martin, what do you think about? Is there a ceiling to the number of people that we can achieve in the same organization, working on the same thing, and instilling the same culture that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think there's going to be. I think there are a lot of organizations out there that are the Walking Dead, right? That are in the olden days when the markets were much slower, there was much less competition. There's lots of organizations that were able to grow massive coffers on doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. They didn't have to change. They didn't have to adapt to the market because customers weren't demanding change. They just wanted stuff, right? So they get given stuff and they were happy. But we've had a resurgence even in manufacturing, even in my wife said something the other day. We were in a store, a clothing store, and she's like, oh, I really like how some of these things look, but I don't want to buy it because I think everybody else will be wearing the same thing. Right? And that's before the Industrial Revolution. What we were doing was everybody was wearing different things. Every piece of clothing, every piece of furniture, everything we created was unique and distinct. And then when we scaled up, we lost that distinctiveness into the sameness, right? And people are now wanting that distinctiveness back. They want that custom feel back, which is why we're seeing an absolute massive increase in things like Kickstarter and these smaller niche things. And I think that even in that space, that manufacturing is moving more local, right? So that you can have that. That's why 3D printers are on the rise, so that we can have our custom thing. The 4 people that use that template that's up there for the 3D printers, or 400 people, right? Buy that template and have that thing. Only 400 of this thing exist in the world. That bespoke nature, and I think that's happening across the board. And it's been much easier in the software world. And it's one of the reasons that companies like Google have looked at this problem of how do we scale, how do we deploy all of these little ideas, run these experiments, and then wrap up the things that aren't working. And they're hitting all sorts of things, like across the world, labor laws are different, right? Across the world, we have to figure out how do we scale up and scale down at scale. So what did they do? They're like, okay, sod this. We're not a big company anymore. We're a venture capitalist organization. We have all this money, and we're going to fund and spin up little startups. If they're successful, we keep them going. If they're not, we're going to kill them, right? And that then removes that this organization is actually a distinct smaller organization that's able to adapt more quickly, and it's either viable in the market or it's not. And if it's not viable in the market, it just dies, and they're not left with a bunch of baggage that they don't need at the end of it. I know I'm calling people baggage, right? But
how dare you? Well,
I know,
you know,
there's
Martin,
a lot of baggage out there, man. There's a lot of baggage out there.
In a world that's increasingly connected, right? Like I watch a lot of period TV, period movies, and there's this age-old trope in Hollywood, like a French woman walks into an American thing, and it's like, oh my God, look, totally different fashion, totally different everything. But now we're infinitely connected to everybody. So I have a friend who he's going to make about $100,000 this year in his side hustle. And all he does is he buys stuff at the store, the big box store that you and your wife were at, and he puts people's names on it because people want to feel special. Cialdini talked about this. Like it's people crave to feel unique and special and to have that thing that only 400 of them exist. And I do think, to connect this back to the product operating model, is there's also a bias or a mentality of correlation and causation here. Is like, hey, those companies did that and they're struggling or they're failing, or that's my old company and it didn't work there, so it's not going to work here. Both good and bad, things that do work and things that don't work, which is why I think we see this rebirth or phoenix idea of new things that sound an awful lot like the old things, but we have that.
Yeah, and then we're going to lose a perspective on the other ones. And I think that's where new terms that you stick, like to happy new buzzwords like product discovery and validation. It's I think it's incredibly important. And to be honest, today I did my accreditation for the new Scrum Lure course on the discovery and validation skills course. So if anyone's listening and needs a new course, join me. But I think those are the new buzzwords that we've been iterating over and over again, but we kind of lost track of those. And they're not new things, not at all. We've been advocating for people to talk to their users and customers over and over and over again. But for some reason, it's just sticking there in the development part, and we go back to chugging stuff out.
Get out of the echo chamber, right? I can see it behind you, build trap. I can see the build trap sitting right behind you.
It is.
But I think it's even worse than not talking to their customers. They're not even most software engineers, people, let's call them people on teams. Most people on teams are sitting there not able to change their processes. They're sitting there not able to change their backlog. They are not actually able to release their product because they have this massive, long, convoluted process to happen after they're done.
And that's the problem. And if we're really being honest, are they really agile? No, they're not. And this is it strikes to the chord. Like we're talking about people's need for personalization, people's need for recognition, people's need for empowerment. Right? It's I was at a face-to-face in America, and the native North Americans were starting to quote this movie. The movie's called Office Space. And like, did you get the memo? And I'm like, hadn't heard it. So I then watched the movie and I get it. And it's like that old cubicle hell that was big in the 80s. And some of you young folks would not know what it's like to turn up and look at a really big 14-inch monitor that has 2 colors. And grind code for 8 hours. And then when you had a problem, you had to look up a book or go and find your local Martin and go, how do you do that? And he turns around and goes, oh, you're missing a semicolon on line 4. That sort of stuff. So people want to actually be connected to their work. We're finding a greater awareness of sustainability. I fear we're talking through, like just having a look at the podcast, we're looking through this through a very male Western lens. And I think when we expand this to the global economy and things that are happening, that need to make the whole world a safer, better place. And we can achieve that through connectedness. We can achieve that through empowerment. And I think it's time to throw away a lot of the baggage, a lot of the constructs and the packaging around original agility, and get right back to the core principles. And you can see it with the stuff that Jim Highsmith's doing. He's calling it out. Like if we go back to basics, we'll be a lot better off because we strayed from the path. We've mechanized it. We've put too much emphasis on the structures. So if we get rid of the structures and focus back on the principles, I think we can recover. And I think that's what this product emphasis is about. It's like, can we just get back to the core principles that are scalable, deployable, empower our people, connect people to their work, deliver better value, make the world a better place? Can we get back there, please?
Do you think, in that sense, that we should make more of a democracy in the organization and empower? We're talking about empowerment, but also like usually it's the lower parts of the organization that kicks out, that gets kicked out. Shouldn't we be able to vote on our CEO either?
There's two organizations, Sander, in an organization. There's the hierarchy, which is command authority, right? And then there's the network of communication, which is, I guess, implied authority, right? A competence-based authority, maybe a better way to describe it. And you do kind of need both. That's that autonomy versus alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to get away from having direction set, but what we want to get away from is telling people what to do. My favorite thing to say, which I'm not sure is 100% true, but I like to say it anyway, is that the military realized that command and control was a bad idea when Napoleon defeated the Prussian army, right? And Simon will mostly disagree. Maybe there's a little bit of truth in it, but the idea, the story I heard, Simon, let me tell the story, and then maybe you say the story's true, but the players are not, right? Napoleon pushed responsibility down to the people who were actually at the front to make the decisions on what they needed to do to achieve the objectives that they were trying to achieve. And every other standing army of the time, their modus operandi was you have to send a runner to ask and then get a runner back with a reply. And that time lag, and Napoleon not having that time lag, was, as I understand it in my layman's brain, Simon, how he managed to conquer half of the known world, right? Or most of the known world, whatever it was. So that's happening in organizations, right? You've got the people that you're talking about, Xander, the people at the bottom who are doing the work are in direct communication with the market. The market's down here, but the CEO is right at the top. And I worked at Merrill Lynch. There were 16 people between me and the CEO, right? 16 people, 16 escalate, because you don't go to your boss unless it's really important, right? So how difficult does it need to be to then go to your boss and try and escalate it? And then it has to be difficult enough for them to escalate it to the next level. And then once somebody's made a decision, they have to express it enough going down for something to actually happen. And that massive delay is what's causing that problem. And it's because the command authority is like a standing freaking army that they're sending runners.
So effectively, this problem was solved back in the 17th century when the Dutch, British, French, and Spanish navies were chasing each other around the world, stealing from each other, may I emphasize.
Pirates.
No. You're only a pirate if you raise the black flag. Now, basically, one of the things that was really effective, if you were a privateer, you had permission from the government, whichever government you are raping and pillaging for, to carry out that misbehavior. And I'd encourage you all to read the book Be More Pirate, because it debunks a number of myths. But what we're talking about here is clear constraints or operating boundaries. And I think this is the essence of good leadership and management. So if the manager has clear constraints, they should be encouraging that conversation from the people who work for them. So that chain of command. And in really, really good structures, that communication of good news and bad news will go up and down that chain of command very quickly. What you're describing at Merrill Lynch was horrendous. I have seen it work where it goes up to the CEO and back in minutes. And that can only work when people know their operational boundaries and you've got good constraints in place. And I think this is where I love Jocko Willink's books, Extreme Ownership, and the really good one was his sequel, Dichotomy of Leadership, because he goes into some of the more nuances of the situation. If you know where your boundaries are, you're entirely comfortable going to your leader going, I need some help. And we need to create that space where it's okay to give and get help. And we're talking about trust here. So if we
Yeah.
have purpose-driven organizations with clear constraints that are built on trust, we will have empowered organizations.
And
that's-
widening those guardrails when people show that they respect them and treat them
Which
well,
comes
even
from
if they make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I've gotten to the point with a client now where when the foreigners take a lot more vacations this time of year than I do, and I was a little nervous, like, am I going to be doing the right things when you're gone? And they said, I trust you. Within this sphere, I trust you, and I know that if you make a decision, even if I disagree with it, I know you're making it for the right reasons. That was one of the best compliments I've ever gotten. And that's not even somebody I work for. So we just need to create that more inside of companies with people that we might call teammates instead of, in this case, I'm an external person to that. But it didn't happen overnight. I didn't come in with that day one. It took time.
It's not naive, right? You've got to earn. You got to earn your stripes. You got to demonstrate competence.
Yep.
You got to demonstrate that competence to ultimately become the maestro.
Indeed.
And that's a good segue into start wrapping up this great conversation. I think we can keep going on this for hours. So maybe it's good to continue this discussion in another future episode. Any last questions coming from either of you?
Okay.
Martin, what has been the highlight of your week?
The highlight of my week? The highlight of my week was actually I got some code working this week. I've been taking the summer break. Like Jim was saying, most of Europe kind of grinds to a halt over the 2 months that we're in the second one of just now. And I'm taking the time to learn some new coding techniques, learn some new architectural techniques, Simon, and apply them within a legacy code base. So trying to figure out how to rewrite, re-architect. And I made some massive configuration changes this week that really clicked. It was the knowledge more than the work, right? I now understand how a whole bunch of stuff goes together that I didn't understand before. So that was my highlight.
Nice, good stuff. I can imagine that has been how do you call that? Not the highlight, but a relief, a mental relief.
Yes, there's a lot of stress in learning something new, and once it clicks and you kind of understand it, that's a big relief. And then you can start applying it, and then you find out you were wrong, right? But that's the whole.
But that's the thing, right? If you can embrace the fact that you're wrong, then you can actually grow as a person and ultimately as an organization. Yeah. That's the topic for the next one. What about you, Simon?
Something similar. I've been paying attention to my website, which hasn't had enough love recently. So tweaking that a bit, working on that, learning some new tech stuff. I actually wrote some code, well, a little bit. And I had a PSM course on Monday, Tuesday of this week. And I love that training and the buzz you get out of hearing different people's learnings. I just like sharing the ideas that we do. So that's me. What about you, Sander?
For me, I think that slowly the pieces of the market are starting to fit together. I mean, the last, let's say, year and a half, the Agile market has started to collapse, and the future fog has been pulled up, and now I feel it's finally going down a little bit, and that helps to clarify where we're going, what we can do, how we. Yeah. What our role is going to be in that sense. And I think this podcast is going to be the starting direction of those. And that helps me a lot in what we're going to do for going forward and what's going to come up.
Cool.
What about you, Jim? To wrap it up, to bring it home.
Yeah, I'm going to go non-work, I guess. In general, the highlight of my week has been, it's been a very, very busy week, but it's been effective. Like I was telling somebody today, it's been a crazy week. in a variety, both personally and professionally. But I realized that I'm playing the infinite game with my current home in my life, right? And that realization has helped me not get as stressed about the little stuff, because I realized I'm making decisions more and more often in my personal life that are infinite decisions, right? That are going to benefit me in the long run. And if you're not familiar with this whole idea of the infinite game or whatever, there's a bunch of good stuff out there about it, but it's just a longer term thing. So just doing some self-reflection, getting outside. I've been outside quite a bit this week, played hooky a little bit here and there throughout some of the sunny afternoons, and that was all good.
Good stuff. Yeah, the weather's great. I'm looking forward to do some cornholing with you again as well.
Oh my God, you got to choose different words. That's he means he wants to play
No.
game
I
with
meant
me,
exactly
everybody.
what I said.
Okay.
And let's wrap it up. Thank you, gents. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it, guys.